Good afternoon. It's nice to be here, and what we're going to talk about today is creating a living flower arrangement. Really what we're doing is we're putting plants in a container to give us a pleasing arrangement. We already do this with a lot of our container gardening, but we're going to do it with bulbs. We're going to talk about forcing spring blooming bulbs, and then we're going to talk about summer blooming bulbs. So first of all, I just wanted to start off with what is a bulb? Well, by definition, it's a subterranean bud that produces roots below and shoots a stem to the surface, which in turn develops leaves and blooms. So we never really think of, our bulbs out there as perennial. They just they come back for us every year, so we classify them that, but they do store or have part of their life cycle completely underground. Another definition is modified stem or vertical shoot with thickened leaves or scales that serve as a food storage organ for a dormant plant. And it's also considered to be a resting stage of certain perennial monocots. And for those of you that have had some Master Gardener training or some botany, a monocot is a plant that has parallel veins in their leaves. So think about your daffodils and think about your crocus and all of those. They're monocots with their parallel veins. But they're also called a geophyte, and this is a term that maybe you're not familiar with, but it's the correct term for plants that form underground storage organs, including bulbs, as well as tubers and corms. And another way to put it is a geophyte is a plant that depends for part of its life cycle on an underground reserve of food. So we're talking about our tulips, daffodils, our crocus, some of our tubers. There's many different types of underground storage structures. So today we're going to talk first about forcing spring blooming bulbs indoors, and then I'm going to switch over to summer blooming. And really the difference is the season of flower, and with the spring blooming bulbs, they have to have a chilling requirement. Both types will require a resting period. And after bloom, all need to be able to produce food to build their bulb or that underground storage structure for next year. So we know that our bulbs, when the foliage starts to die down, what's actually happening is that's feeding that bulb for the next year. And here I'm just showing you tulips in my garden, Elegant Lady, and Magic Star, which was actually a doubled Oriental Lily. So here in this chart, it just kind of gives you an idea. If you look at number 1, when we plant, and this is just showing you a tulip, we're planting these bulbs in the fall. When we get them, their bud is already initiated, it's ready to go. Now it has to have its chilling requirement, and we call that simply winter. So we plant that in the ground, say we do it in mid-October, that bulb is actually going to start to grow. It's going to send up a shoot and it's going to start to sprout roots. And then as the temperatures drop and the soils cool, the growth stops. And now it has to have its chilling requirement. Sometimes you might hear the word vernalization. Every bulb, every type of bulb has a different amount of time. Your bulbs that bloom very early have a short chilling requirement, and those that bloom late have a longer chilling requirement. So when we talk about forcing spring blooming bulbs, we would hope to have a combination of bulbs that have fairly similar chilling requirements to be successful. So once that chilling requirement is met, the bulb continues to grow, sends up a stalk, leaves, and blooms. After it's done blooming, we have to leave the foliage so that it can feed through photosynthesis, sending food and nutrients back down to that bulb for the next year. So we're going to talk about forcing spring blooming bulbs. You know, I always think forcing, sometimes I'm pleading, coaxing, persuading them to bloom for me. But I really want you to think about this. The flowering of a bulb or plant using artificial growing conditions that simulate those required in nature. That's what we're doing when we're forcing these spring bulbs. What is it that they're receiving out in their natural environment right now? Think about your bulbs, okay? They're cold. They're getting their chilling requirements. So what we have to do is we have to fool them into blooming indoors off season. And what we want to do is we want to simulate late autumn and then a gradual drop in temperatures going into deep winter, and then bringing them back out of that cool like spring would, but we're going to do this on an accelerated time frame. What naturally would occur out in your garden that might take 3-4 months, we're going to try to do this in anywhere between 12 to 16 weeks. You're going to use controlled environmental conditions to regulate the growth, development, and flowering of bulbs, or I'm going to talk about some other methods that you can use. And this is what greenhouse growers, when they're forcing the bulbs, we see them at Valentine's Day. We start to see them late winter, and that's what they've done. They've potted them up and they've put them into this accelerated time frame of the temperatures that they need. So what do you need to do this? Okay, for the spring blooming bulbs, there's recommended bulbs. In your handouts, you have one that talks about possible collections. This is through Brent and Becky's Bulbs. Just telling you when they're available and what time they'll bloom. There's an early spring combo, a mid-spring, and then it goes into the summer blooming bulbs are on the bottom. You want a clean container deep enough to accommodate the rooting. Okay, when we're putting these bulbs in, we're putting them in not in their normal spacing, because remember, this is an artificial environment. Out in nature, we wouldn't put them this close. You want a clean, well-draining media with no fertilizer. These bulbs have everything they need. They have everything they need when you get them and plant them, so you don't have to worry about fertilizer until if you want them to die down and you're going to replant them, but we'll talk about that later. You need a dark, cooling or chilling area for the spring bulbs. Then you're going to bring them out after the correct amount of time, and you want to warm them up. So you're also going to need to have some sort of light, because those bulbs will be emerging and wanting to grow and bloom. So recommended bulbs. Most bulb catalogs have lists of bulbs suitable for forcing. My personal choice, having done this many times, is I like to select shorter varieties, especially with your spring bloomers, because they will tend to stretch in your artificial light, and it depends on what light you have. So I tend to go with the shorter varieties, or as they're emerging, I will put some type of grow hoop in that container so that they can come up, and if they do get so tall, they won't flop over. Because, as I said, they do have the tendency to stretch. Your container, you want to have it clean. Now, you want to have a container where you have at least 3 inches of media below your deepest bulb. So here, this is an azalea pot. It's more squat. This would be good if you were just doing one type of bulb. Okay, so let's say you're just going to do all crocus, or you're going to do all tulips. That's where an azalea pot works well. But when you're layering, which is what we're going to do, you want to have a deeper pot, 10, 12, 14 inches, okay? You want to have that, that depth. Now you can do plastic or you can do clay. They both have pros and cons. Plastic, it doesn't dry out rapidly and it's lightweight. So not drying out rapidly, you're going to have to watch your watering so that it doesn't get too wet, but the container is lightweight. Clay is porous, so that means it can dry out more quickly. But for many gardeners, they find clay to be more aesthetically pleasing. I prefer to do this in plastic, and then I will slip that plastic container into a decorative basket or a decorative pot. The media that you're going to use. The media, its real purpose is to anchor and support the forced bulbs. Okay, we're not planting some of these at their normal depths. We want to have something that's going to be able to hold them and they can really anchor in. And of course, it's going to provide moisture. You want it to be clean. I don't reuse any of my media when I'm doing this. I prefer a well-drained potting mix. Usually that's going to have your sphagnum, maybe perlite or vermiculite, and some soil in it. That works very well. And I don't want to have any added fertilizers. I also should add, don't have any of those water extending polymers. So if you're looking at a bag of potting mix and it says, extend your watering, between, watering times, that tells me that there's probably those polymers in there. And my experience is then these soils don't dry out quickly and you could have some rotting. Now, if on the label it says wetting agent, a wetting agent is different. A wetting agent is something that has been put in that coats the media so it can readily absorb moisture. And if you ever have bone dry sphagnum peat moss, you better start wetting that up yesterday, because sometimes that peat, if it doesn't have a wetting agent, is very slow to take in moisture. So just realize wetting agent is not those water absorbing polymers. So here, this was just a mix that I got from one of our local garden centers. It's very well drained. You can see it has some perlite in it, some soil, some peat moss. Sometimes some products you might get some core, which is just coconut fiber. Sometimes you might actually have partially decomposed rice hulls or bark. All of those things will help your media drain, and being organic, they'll break down. So we've got to talk about the chilling, because with spring blooming bulbs, and you'll see on this slide it says spring bulbs only, we have to mimic late fall and winter. So what we want to do is, once we get these containers planted, is place them in a 50-degree area for roughly 2 to 3 weeks. I'm usually doing this in October. I'll put them out in my shed. That's usually at that time of year, it's going to stay that temperature. After that, now we have to mimic going into deep winter, so 35 to 45 degrees, and then depending on the bulbs you have, on average 10 to 12 weeks. And for me, you can do that in a refrigerator, but we'll also talk about some pit cooling and some other methods. The average time, 14 to 16 weeks. You do want to keep your temperatures above freezing. Don't let the container freeze. And we'll talk about all of this. So you can put them in a refrigerator after they've gone through that 50-degree cooling, because remember, that's just fall going into winter. You can put it into a refrigerator, keeping your temperatures, at about 40. Be sure that there is no fruits or vegetables stored in there. Fruits and vegetables are giving off an ethylene gas. They're actually senescing. They're maturing. Once a fruit or vegetable is picked, it's no longer actively growing, and it's actually starting to die. So if you put your bulbs in there, that ethylene gas promotes aging. It promotes growth, and we don't want that. Years ago, I worked in a florist, and we couldn't keep our lunches in the flower cooler because if we had an orange or a pear or an apple, it could give off that ethylene gas and shorten the vase life of those flowers. That's the same thing if you have a flower arrangement on a table, don't have it next to like a bowl of fruit because of that ethylene gas. Uncontrolled is putting it in a uniformly cooled garage or an unheated building where you are fairly comfortable that it's not going to get to those temperatures where that container can freeze. Maybe you have a cellar, or I'm going to show you pit or trench chilling. So now you've gone to the gradual cooling, you've marked your calendar when to take them out. Now you have to think about the warming. Too much too soon is going to be a disaster. Because remember, spring kind of gradually comes in and temperatures will warm up. Hopefully you're going to see some roots through drainage holes. Sometimes I don't always see that, but I know the time is up. But it's a good sign to see that. I want to put them in a cool, bright area, about 45, 50 degrees, and gradually expose them to warming temperatures. They're emerging. Just like outdoors, we have to provide them light. Outdoors, they're popping up out of the ground, and they're being welcomed by sunlight. So now you have to think about lights. Fluorescent lights work very well. You want to set them about 5 to 6 inches above the pot, and then adjust them as your plants grow. If you keep your fluorescent lights too far away, they're going to stretch. And then you're going to monitor the moisture. So here I'm just showing you some combinations that I planted back in 2009. One was called a cool and calm combo. One was warm and wonderful. So cool and calm had the softer colors, warm and wonderful a little bit brighter. So here's the cool and calm: apricot beauty tulip, accent daffodil, gypsy queen hyacinth, belvalia, which was a new one for me, and then an iris reticulata. So you can see it's more of the cooler tones. Warm and wonderful, there we have our daffodil. Our tulips, more in the orange tones. We had another small miniature daff. We had a tulip, a short tulip, and then we had golden crocus all the way around it. So you've got your bulbs, you're all ready to start. Take your container, you're going to fill the bottom about 3 inches deep. This is a 10 to 12 inch container. You want that, have a minimum of 3 inches of media below. Here, you can see we're at 3 inches. Our container was about 10 inches deep when we did this. It's recommended take the paper coating off, and also cut off any of the dead roots, because these are going to be crammed in there, and you want them to have as much space to grow. And just by having those old roots, that can actually impede the new ones from coming on. So we just snip them off. I should mention you only snip off roots on spring blooming bulbs. Don't snip off the roots of summer blooming bulbs. Here we started with the apricot beauties in the center. We placed them close together in the center first. One thing when you're planting tulips to force, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but a tulip usually has a flat side and a rounded side. You want the rounded side to be facing outwards. The flat side facing inwards will produce the first large leaf. The round side will come up later and smaller. When forcing, we will have many bulbs in this container, and we prefer that the first larger leaf to grow towards the center to give the other bulbs more room. Now, if you're doing just a pot of all tulips, make sure that you have the flat side facing outwards, especially along the edge of your pot. That larger leaf will drape nicely over the edge. Place them close together, and then you're going to take your dry media and you're going to cover them up just so you see the noses, because you've got to know where they are when you go to layer the next bulb. Here we had some hyacinths. That was our next layer. And I staggered them, you can see kind of in that pattern, without covering the narcissus. And we're going to cover those up to their nose. Now we have the Belvalias and the iris, and we just alternated them. Just around the edge, we kind of, went, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now this is our last layer. Now we're going to completely cover, and the soil should come up to approximately 3/4 of an inch from the rim. This is the warm and wonderful. Here we started out with narcissus in the center. So here we placed the narcissus close together in the center. We covered them up so we could see where they are, just up to their noses. Then we had the tulips. We again positioned them around so we're not covering up the narcissus. And take your dry media and cover them up to their noses. Now we had the smaller, the jumblies. These are a small narcissus, very sweet. Usually have about 3 flowers per stalk. Stagger without covering the bulbs below and cover up to the noses. I think you can see what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to make sure that they're all in there, but no one is blocking anyone else from emerging. And here we had a crocus, a golden yellow, and we had the Tulipa tarda, which is one of the species tulips. And again, we alternated them, just put them around. Then again, cover completely, and you should be approximately 3/4 inch from the rim. Label and date. On here, you can see that this was going in on October 29th, 2009, because that's going to be your starting point for the chilling. So, mimicking that late fall and winter cooling or chilling. I placed mine out in my shed. I put them in there for a couple of weeks, or you might have a cool room or basement that's about 45 to 50-ish degrees. Then they have to go into their cold, 35 to 45 degrees. I try to keep them in a refrigerator at about 40 to 42 for 10 to 12 weeks. See, growers, they're putting these containers on these big racks and they're rolling them into their cooling rooms, and then they just set the temperature. They know that they can set that temperature at 50 degrees. They know then when to drop it down. But for you and I, most of us don't have those big cooling chambers. As I said earlier, average time is about 14 weeks, and don't let them freeze. Now, before chilling, you want to water that pot thoroughly. You want to water till it's uniformly damp. Water, let it run through, water again. Now, if your media settles and you're seeing some of those upper bulbs, go ahead and cover them, okay? Because sometimes that happens. Then, really water sparingly, if at all, while chilling. Just think about outside, the ground's frozen, up above, though the temperatures below where our bulbs are, they're not at a freezing temperature, but as far as moisture penetrating, the ground's frozen, it doesn't get to the bulbs very easily. So water sparingly. I think I might have watered them, maybe every 4 weeks, maybe once in the middle. I really can't remember, but you want to water them sparingly. After chilling, you're going to bring them out. Remember, you're bringing them out into a cool room. So you water sparely until growth begins. And then, just like they would get in the spring with spring rains, you want to keep them well watered. Let the excess water drain out. And as they're starting to fill, as those roots are starting to fill, you're getting the top growth, they can start to dry out more quickly. So you might have to start watering on a regular schedule toward the end of the bloom time. So here, I moved them to a cooler location. As you said, they were the end of October. I put them in about the middle of November and set my temperature at about 40, 43. That was fine. I don't have a designated refrigerator, so it had to share space with some of our other beverages. Now, if you don't have a refrigerator that you can put them in, you can always try pit or trench cooling. Again, you're going to let them gradually drop temperatures 2 to 3 weeks, and then you're going to move to a cooler location. And you can see here it's about 2 to 3 weeks after they were initially planted. So what you're going to do is you're going to bury them outside. First, you want to cover with landscape cloth to prevent the soil mixing. So here we just had some landscape cloth. We attached it and secured it so that when we put them in, you wouldn't have soil mixing. Okay, wonder where my picture went. Oh, there it is. Okay. Here, what we did is we buried them. This was actually our compost. We buried them down deep. You can do this in your soil. We wanted the whole container to be about 5 inches below ground. So the top of that container about 5 inches below ground, and then we covered it. And that's simply pit or trench chilling. Mark it on your calendar so that you remember when to dig them up. So this was after 14 weeks indoors. So you can see stuff starting to sprout. Okay, now it's time to think about taking them out and continue on with our forcing. So on February 7th, I placed them under my grow lights. That top picture, I'm using a high intensity discharge bulb. Excuse me. So following my instructions, I could keep those bulbs approximately, those light bulbs, 30 inches above my container. So if you have high intensity discharge, follow the instructions. If you have fluorescence, then you need to keep them closer because fluorescents need to be closer. So here we brought them out. We let them warm up at 50, 60 degrees. We were giving them bright light. So you can see here, stuff's starting to pop. There you're seeing on the cool and calm, you're seeing the purple iris reticulata coming up, and on the other, the warm and wonderful, you're seeing the crocus. Here, warm and wonderful, you can see the crocus are getting past their prime. The miniature, the Jumblie Narcissus, that's the short yellow Narcissus, are coming up surrounding the tulips that were in not quite in the center, and then we still have yet to see those inner Narcissus to bloom. So here, with our trench, that was one that we had forced in the refrigerator. In the trench, we took them out, and you can see they're starting to pop. They're starting to come up, just like the ones that we saw coming out of the refrigerator. Ten days later, with the pit or trench cooling, put them under the bright lights. If the temperatures are adequate, you could just set them outdoors, just don't let them freeze. And this is what we had 10 days later with the pit or trench cooling. And here you see the one with the yellows, the center daffodils are finally coming up. They're going to be the last that are going to bloom for you. I'm trying to think what those were. Those were flare. No, those were Ceylon in the center. Then you see on the other side the cool and calm, and again the center tulips are just starting to emerge. You've got your hyacinths and some of the white daffodils.
Now, what can you do with them after they're done blooming? Well, there's a couple different things that you can do. If you want to save them, you deadhead the old flowers off. Don't let them set seed. As with all bulbs, you have to allow them to die back naturally. In the container, you can let them dry and plant them out in your garden. You could try relayering them when you plant them, or you could plant each type individually. If you want to plant them now, dig a hole, knock the bulbs out, and plant them, but don't cover the foliage and let them dry down naturally. Or you may choose just to throw everything in your compost pile and they will, biodegrade and break down.
Spring bulbs, you have to really think about that chilling and warming. Summer bulbs are different. Summer bulbs, you're going to get them usually shipped to you. Oh, usually I'm getting mine late April or so, and they're all ready to go. All ready to go. They don't need anything. You can just put them straight into the containers. So, summer blooming bulbs, you usually get them late winter, early spring. I like to order top-sized bulbs because they're going to be growing in an artificial environment, and I really want that wow of a living arrangement. Again, the container should allow for 3 inches of media below the deepest bulb. 8-inch azalea pot is fine for just one type of bulb, but if you want to do the layering, you're going to need something deeper. And again, you're going to use a well-drained media. And the picture I'm showing you there is from my friends Brett and Becky, and that's just on their front porch, and that's what they have for their living flower arrangements. So we have Light Up the Night. We have a beautiful white lily. We have a dahlia in cream. We have I'm drawing a blank. The Xanthodecia in a light cream. We have Gladiola, White Friendship, and then we have Oxalis, which are the clovers. I mean, like what we see now for St. Patrick's Day. Cool and Calm. Here we have a beautiful oriental lily. Again, we have the Xanthodecia. This time our dahlias are kind of a cream with a pink tone. We have a Gladiola, Flevo Dancer, and then the Oxalis this time are the purple Oxalis. Just as we saw before, you're going to fill your container. You want to have a minimum of 3 inches of soil below your deepest bulb. So here, I'm showing you diagrams rather than actual planting, but the concept is still the same. Here we had 3 oriental lilies, Mona Lisa. Put those in the center. They can touch each other, and you're going to do the exact same thing you did with the spring bulbs, just you're going to cover them with dry media up to their tips. Next, we're going to put the Gladiola, the Flevo Dancers, around there, making sure we don't cover up the oriental lilies. And again, take your media, cover them up just so you see the tips. Now, with here, you've got the Xanthodecia and the Dahlia. You could put them, I put them, as you can see, kind of on opposite sides. Really, it's your choice if you want to put them together. I just wanted that balance. I'm going to place them in the container and cover them up to the tips. And then scattered the oxalis and completely cover. My friend Brent always calls the oxalis shoes and socks of the container because it anchors the container and just fills in that bottom with just a beautiful, in this case, purple color. And here, when I taught the class before, I asked people to send me pictures of their arrangements. And here you can see the dahlia emerging, the beautiful lilies. To look underneath, you can see the oxalis, and the gladiolus have yet to bloom. Now here, what I found with some of the glads, I like to put some type of grow hoop or something around them or individually stake them so that they don't get really tall and flop over. This is actually a picture I just took last summer. I had a bunch of my neighbor friends. This was, we had potted these up probably about 4 years ago, and they were gone this summer, and they asked me if I would water their plants. And here were her Mona Lisas, the ones that we had put in the pot 4 or 5 years earlier. She had put them in the ground, and they're still blooming for her every year. They're just beautiful. So think about that when you plant these. Some of these bulbs can do wonderfully in our gardens. This was the other combo. This was the light up the night. So here we have 3 oriental lilies, Casablanca. Again, placing them in the center, touching each other, cover them up so that you just see the tips. Then we had gladiolas, place them around the lilies, cover to the tips. Then here we had the Xanthodycia and the dahlia. Again, you can see where I placed them kind of on opposite sides of the container, cover up to the tips. And here we have the green oxalis, just kind of scattered them so they can be the shoes and socks of that container. And then completely cover. So now you have to decide. If you're going to start these before your nighttime temperatures are above 60, about, when they start to get 55 to 60, water them thoroughly and start indoors in a warm 60 to 70 degree area, nice sunny spot, or on a grow mat under lights to get an early start. Because a lot of our bulbs, our summer blooming bulbs, don't emerge until our soils start to warm up. And then monitor your watering, okay? So you have to decide, are you going to start them earlier or are you going to wait until your nighttime temperatures are warm enough? So if you're going to do that, don't water them until you're ready to start. Then the bulbs should stay dormant until watered, and when ready, water thoroughly and place outside in a sunny spot. You might choose, maybe you have a couple containers, and you might choose to start one earlier and then start one later so that you have an extended period of bloom. And then monitor your watering. The summer bulb container, you're going to have blooms and foliage coming throughout the summer. Deadhead the flowers to encourage the bulb growth and not seed production. And then the hardy bulbs, plant them in the garden. I have another friend with oxalis. She has had oxalis now for 4 or 5 years. You can put those out, or you can plant them, and she also has them indoors where she brings them in and always has them over the winter. The non-hardy bulbs would be the Xanthodycia, the dahlias, probably your gladiolas. You could store them in a dry peat in a consistently cool spot over the winter so they won't freeze. So that would be another option. But I can tell you the oriental lilies do wonderfully out in our gardens.
For the spring and summer bulbs, you want to water them thoroughly when you first start, and then since it's cool, just kind of water them sparingly. Depending on the weather, maybe every 5 to 7 days, give them a good dousing. But the bulbs are ready to grow, and so they have everything they need, so you don't have to worry about adding fertilizer. If you want to keep the bulbs, though, I should have said this with the spring blooming bulbs. If you wish to replant them and you're letting them grow in that container until they naturally start to die down, fertilize as the bulbs are growing before bloom or lightly after bloom. The same with the summer blooming bulbs. If you're going to let them die down naturally, give them some fertilizer as they are growing before bloom or lightly after bloom. Full sun is preferred.
One of the combos that we did one year was Patriotic, and we had red, white, and blue. You see here, again, we had a beautiful lily, we had gladiolus, we had a dahlia, and I think it was tritolias was the bulb that we had as blue in the bottom. And so this was one year we did Patriotic. Patriotic had 3 bright diamond lilies. It had 5 red gladiolas. The blue was the tritolias, which are the very interesting bulb if you haven't tried it. Then we had red dahlias, and we had the white blooming oxalis. So if you're thinking of doing this, this is one of your handouts, and this is just some recommendations. And it starts off, how they list this is the deepest ones are listed first. So let's say you wanted to do a warm and wonderful early spring. Those red paradise listed first, they go in first. Cover them to their tips, then the narcissus, cover them, then the hyacinths, cover them, and then the small miniature narcissus. The first 3 or 4 are for are for your spring blooming bulbs. The ones on the bottom are recommendations for your summer blooming bulbs. I also gave you a handout with, we talked about everything. It's the care instructions for living flower arrangements. So everything that we talked about, you also have that on a handout. Just some resources, Brent and Becky's bulbs. There's a really good publication by Iowa State University for forcing flower bulbs. And I also found a lot of really good information from White Flower Farm. There's lots of bulb companies out there that often will list combinations or things for forcing. So, you might want to give it a try. This is my contact information. And as Nancy said, we have several years now of past recordings of the 4 seasons. Now it's a little bit of a snag because we have to close caption them and it's just taking longer. So as she said, please be patient, and all of these will eventually get put up on the YouTube so you can review at a later time. There is a brief survey. You can scan this barcode with your mobile device to take a brief survey. We would love to know your thoughts and comments. There's also a website that you can go to also. And we would love to hear your comments on the program. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'll go backwards for my contact information. If you think of something, you want to contact me later, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to type a question in the chat box or open up your mic, I'll be happy to take questions.
Yes, I wondered, where does it say like the order to put them in for either spring or summer?
You should have a handout. Let me go back. This handout right here. That was one of the handouts that was available to you. So if you look under, let's look under Patriotic, drop down to the very bottom one, which is the Summer Patriotic. The one that is listed first is the deepest. So here you have Lilium novana. That's the one you would start in the center. After that, you would come around and put the next set in, cover those liliums up to their noses, then put the next one, which is a gladiola called atomic, put them around so you're not covering them, cover those to the noses, then the single ones you would put in, as I said, one on one side, one on the other, and then the oxalis would go the very top layer. Does that help?
Okay, yes.
We did have a question. Is there anything in a concrete pot that could leach out to interfere with the bulbs? Boy, concrete pots, I really wouldn't worry about the leaching. I would worry about the weight because you got to move these things around. That would be my only really concern, especially if it's an aged pot that's been out and you've had it for a while. I really wouldn't think of anything that would affect it, just that it's going to be very heavy. Okay, maybe I just covered everything so thoroughly. You're all just excited to go and do it. I'll be on for a little bit, but if you need to sign out, I understand. Again, if you could go and let us know what you thought of that survey, we'd greatly appreciate it.